What if a vision wasn't just a hallucination, but a message from something deeper than you've ever known? On a quiet October day in 1913, Carl Gustav Jung boarded a train heading across Switzerland. The man sitting in that carriage was no ordinary commuter. He was already one of the most respected psychiatrists in the world. Once Freud's heir apparent, Jung was carving out his own groundbreaking path in psychology. Rational, structured, clinical, and then it happened. As Jung gazed out the train window, a terrifying image seized him. A monstrous flood sweeping across the continent, drowning everything in its path. Blood-red waters consumed cities. Corpses floated. The devastation was total. He blinked. The train clattered forward, but the vision remained. And it didn't stop there. Over the next several weeks, more visions followed. Oceans of blood, endless death. Europe in ruins. Jung, ever the scientist, feared the worst. Was he going mad? Was this a psychotic break? He had studied such things. Now he was living them. And yet just months later, World War I erupted, unleashing exactly what Jung had foreseen: rivers of blood and unspeakable destruction across Europe. It wasn't madness. It was something else entirely. But what? This moment, this one vision, became a rupture point in Jung's life. It shook him to his core, collapsing the boundary between the rational world and something ancient, symbolic, and terrifying. It would mark the beginning of what Jung called his confrontation with the unconscious. A descent into a living myth, into madness, but a madness with meaning. In this video, we'll explore this pivotal event, the shocking vision that changed Jung forever. You'll learn why it wasn't just a psychological crisis, but an initiation. How it led to the creation of the Red Book, and why this descent may hold the key not only to Jung's legacy, but to the healing of the modern soul. Because Jung didn't just have a vision, he listened to it. And what he found could change the way you see your own mind. Carl Jung had spent his life studying the unconscious, through myth, dream, and clinical observation. But in the autumn of 1913, he found himself caught in a personal experience so overwhelming, it challenged the very framework he had built. He had already begun to sense an impending psychological breakdown. The tension had been building for months. His separation from Freud earlier that year had left him disoriented, spiritually unanchored. Jung described it as a period of inner uncertainty, but nothing could have prepared him for what came next. The vision struck while he was traveling by train. He looked out the window and, in a waking state, saw a vast flood covering the landscape. A monstrous wave of water swept across Europe. Cities disappeared. People drowned. It wasn't metaphor. It was vivid, sensory, and horrifying. Then came the blood. The blue waters turned red. Jung watched as rivers of blood spread across the continent. This wasn't a fleeting image, it haunted him. It repeated itself over and over in the following days. Jung began to wonder if he was losing his mind. He had studied psychosis. Was he now becoming its subject? He wrote, "I had the feeling that I was menaced by a psychosis, and I was doing my best not to lose my grip." But he didn't tell anyone. Not at first. He continued working, teaching, lecturing, living in two worlds. Outwardly, he was still a doctor. Inwardly, he was spiraling into something unknown. 2 months later, he had another vision. A voice said to him, "Things are about to change." The tone was ominous. Then in August 1914, the First World War began. Millions would die in blood-soaked trenches. Europe was torn apart, exactly as Jung had seen. That moment transformed everything. What Jung had thought was madness was instead a kind of psychic perception, a window into the collective unconscious. It proved to him that the psyche wasn't just personal. It wasn't just memory or trauma. It was mythic. archetypal, alive. He later wrote, "It was as though I had been tapped on the shoulder by something greater than myself." But that was only the beginning. Rather than retreat, Jung made a bold and terrifying choice. He decided to go deeper. If the unconscious wanted to speak, he would listen. Not as a scientist, not as a therapist, but as a human being in crisis. He cleared his schedule, limited his external duties, and began what he called his voluntary confrontation with the unconscious. Each day, he entered a waking meditative state and allowed his fantasies to unfold. He called this practice active imagination. What emerged were not abstract thoughts but full-blown encounters, dialogues with figures, visions of gods, mythical battles, dream landscapes teeming with meaning. He recorded everything by hand, first in small journals, then transcribed them into a large red leather-bound folio with luminous calligraphy and mystical paintings. This became the Red Book. What Jung encountered in those pages is difficult to describe. He met an old man with the wings of a kingfisher, Philemon, who became a kind of inner guru. He descended into the depths of the earth. He was dismembered, devoured, resurrected. He spoke with Elijah and Salome, the dead and the divine. The unconscious took symbolic form and spoke back. At times he feared the process was truly unhinging him. "I had to hold the balance," he later said. "For if I had not held it, I would have gone down into the unconscious without hope of return." But Jung began to realize, this was not psychosis. This was myth. And the psyche was not trying to destroy him, it was trying to initiate him. He understood that the terrifying vision on the train had been an archetypal event, the prelude to his personal descent. But it also represented a collective shift. Europe was on the brink of destruction, and Jung's psyche had sensed it before it erupted. This became one of the foundational insights of his life, that the unconscious does not belong only to the individual. Beneath our personal memories and traumas lies a collective unconscious, a vast symbolic field of inherited images and patterns that shape our dreams, fantasies, and cultural myths. And in moments of great upheaval, personal or civilizational, these forces rise. The vision then was not madness. It was a call. And the Red Book was his answer. From this period emerged many of Jung's most powerful concepts. The shadow, the dark side of the psyche we must face if we are to become whole. The archetypes, universal characters and symbols that appear in myths, dreams, and religious stories across cultures and time. The anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine energies, that must be integrated for psychological balance. The process of individuation, the path toward becoming a complete and authentic self. But Jung didn't publish the Red Book. Not during his lifetime. He shared it with very few people. He feared it would be misunderstood, that the world, still rooted in rationalism and materialism, would see only madness, not meaning. Instead, he translated the contents symbolically into the language of psychology, myth, alchemy, and dreams. His lectures, essays, and books all carried the DNA of the Red Book, but never revealed its raw source. It remained locked away until long after his death. Yet everything changed in that moment, on that train, when Jung saw the flood. It was not just the vision of war that changed him. It was the realization that the soul speaks, and that when it does, we must decide whether to listen or lose ourselves in denial. Jung's vision of the flood wasn't just a personal crisis. It was a message from the soul, his and perhaps ours. In the Red Book, Jung later reflected, "I had to carry the burden of the inner images." He realized that these images, these symbolic experiences, are not meaningless hallucinations. They are messages from the deeper layers of being, what he called the self. And if ignored, they don't disappear. They fester. They haunt. They show up in symptoms, in breakdowns, in global disasters. He chose not to ignore them. That decision, to enter the vision, not resist it, led him into the most challenging and meaningful work of his life. And that choice is what changed him forever. The lesson he left us is simple, but not easy. If you are haunted by something, by dreams, by darkness, by meaninglessness, maybe it's not a sign of madness. Maybe it's the first whisper of a descent that could transform you. The world we live in now is not so different from Jung's. Chaos simmers, Collective anxiety rises. But beneath it, something ancient still stirs. A soul waiting to be heard. Jung didn't publish the Red Book during his life. He wasn't sure we'd be ready. But maybe we are now. So if you've ever felt on the edge, if you've glimpsed something vast behind your dreams, or feared what you might find in silence, remember this. The vision isn't the end. It's the beginning. Not a fall into madness, but a summons toward wholeness. Jung stood at that threshold and said yes. And now it's our turn. To look. To listen. To descend consciously. To return not shattered but changed. Because the unconscious is not our enemy. It is our origin. And sometimes the vision that terrifies you is the one that saves you.